Marcus, stunned, slowly removed his apron. Tears brimmed in his eyes as he looked around the room, filled with people who had cheered for him just moments ago. "Thank you for everything," he said quietly, walking toward the door. Before he could leave, a man in a sharp suit stepped forward. He had been sitting quietly at a corner table, watching everything unfold. "Hold it right there," the man said, his voice firm yet calm. All eyes turned to him as he approached Marcus and Mr. Hayes. "Do you even realize what you just did?" the man said, pointing at Hayes. "You fired this man for saving a life. Do you even understand the magnitude of that?" I don't know who you think you are," Hayes stammered, "but this is my restaurant." "Not anymore," the man interrupted, pulling out a business card. "I'm Christopher Davis, Mrs. Eleanor's son, and I happen to be one of the top attorneys in this city. You've just made a huge mistake." The room buzzed with whispers. "Mrs. Eleanor's son? An attorney? Here's how this is going to go," Christopher continued, his voice dripping with authority. "You're going to apologize to Marcus, reinstate him, and publicly thank him for what he did today. Or I'll see to it that this place never serves another meal again." Mr. Hayes' face turned pale. He opened his mouth to protest, but the intensity in Christopher's eyes silenced him. Christopher turned to Marcus. "You did an incredible thing today. You're a hero. And if this man doesn't treat you like one," he paused dramatically, looking back at Hayes, "then I will personally ensure you have a job where you're respected, appreciated, and paid far more than you ever were here." Christopher's voice was steady, but his words carried thunder. The crowd erupted in cheers once more, and Mrs. Eleanor, still shaky, clapped her hands together, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, son," she whispered. Mr. Hayes shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between Marcus and Christopher. "I am Marcus. Look, maybe I overreacted," he stammered. "You're a valuable employee." Christopher cut him off. "Not good enough," he snapped. "Apologize properly, or I'll see to it that this story is on every news station by tomorrow morning." Hayes swallowed hard, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. He turned to Marcus with a forced smile. I'm sorry, Marcus. I didn't mean to act so harshly. Of course, you're welcome to keep your job here." But Marcus, still holding his apron in hand, stood tall. "No, thank you," he said firmly, his voice steady despite the emotion swirling in his chest. "I don't want to work for someone who sees saving a life as a liability." The room fell silent again, this time out of respect for Marcus's courage. Christopher grinned, clearly proud of the man standing before him. "Good choice, Marcus," he said, clapping him on the back. "How would you like to work for me? My firm could use someone with your quick thinking and integrity." Marcus's eyes widened. "Are you serious?" he asked, disbelief and excitement battling for control of his voice. "As serious as the law," Christopher said with a smirk. "Come by my office tomorrow. Let's discuss your future." The room erupted into applause once more, louder than ever before. Marcus looked around, his heart full of gratitude. He had walked into work that morning just another waiter, but he was walking out a hero with a new future ahead of him. As he left the restaurant for the last time, Mrs. Eleanor reached out and grasped his hand. "Thank you," she said softly. "You didn't just save my life today. You showed everyone in this room what true courage looks like." Marcus smiled at her, his eyes shining. "You're welcome, ma'am. Take care of yourself, okay?" Outside, the crisp air greeted him, filled with possibilities. And as he walked away, the chatter and cheers from inside the restaurant faded into the distance. The next morning, Marcus woke up to the sound of his phone buzzing nonstop. He rubbed his eyes, still adjusting to the light streaming through his small apartment window. When he finally picked up his phone, his jaw dropped. The headline on his screen read, "Black waiter fired for saving elderly woman. Sparks outrage attorney steps in." Below it was a picture of Marcus kneeling beside Mrs. Eleanor, her hand resting on his arm, tears in her eyes. His phone vibrated again. A flood of messages from numbers he didn't even recognize popped up. "Marcus, is this true? You're a hero. I saw you on the news. Stay strong, we support you. Call me, I have an opportunity for you." Marcus sat up, his heart racing. He clicked on a news link someone had sent him, and there he was featured in an online article. It detailed the events of the previous day, highlighting his bravery and the outrageous behavior of Mr. Hayes. The comments section was on fire, filled with people praising Marcus and condemning the restaurant. As he scrolled through, he noticed one comment pinned at the top. "Does anyone know where Marcus works now? Someone like him deserves better. Let's make sure he's taken care of." Marcus couldn't believe it. Strangers from all over were rallying behind him. He was about to put the phone down when a knock at his door startled him. He opened it cautiously to find Christopher Davis standing there, holding 2 cups of coffee and a confident grin. "Good morning, Marcus," he said. "Figured you might need a little caffeine after yesterday." Marcus chuckled, still overwhelmed. "Christopher, what's going on? I woke up to your face all over the news." Christopher finished with a smirk. "Yeah, that was me. I made a few calls. People need to know who you are, Marcus. The world could use more people like you." Marcus shook his head in disbelief. "But I'm just a waiter. I didn't do anything special." Christopher's expression turned serious. "Don't sell yourself short. You did something most people wouldn't have had the courage to do. You saved a life, and you stood your ground. That matters." He handed Marcus one of the coffees and stepped inside. "By the way, the restaurant? Let's just say Mr. Hayes is in some serious hot water. Word's gotten out, and he's losing business fast. But that's not why I'm here." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Then why are you here?" Christopher leaned back against the counter, a gleam in his eye. "I have a proposition for you. You see, the buzz around your story isn't just local, it's going national. People want to know more about you, Marcus. And I think this is an opportunity for you to do something bigger." "Bigger? Like what?" Marcus asked, still trying to process everything. "Use your voice," Christopher said. "You've already inspired so many people. Imagine what you could do if you shared your story, spoke at events, or worked with organizations that need someone with your passion and integrity. You don't have to go back to waiting tables, Marcus. You can make a difference." Marcus stared at Christopher, his mind racing. Could he really step into a role like that? He had spent his whole life working hard just to make ends meet, never imagining he could be something more. But before he could answer, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from an unknown number. Marcus hesitated, but Christopher nodded encouragingly. "Answer it," he said. Marcus picked up, his voice tentative. "Hello." A cheerful voice on the other end replied, "Hi, is this Marcus? My name's Lisa, and I'm a producer for Good Morning America. We'd love to have you on the show to share your incredible story." Marcus nearly dropped the phone. "Good Morning America?" he blurted out, his voice echoing in the small apartment. Christopher's eyebrows shot up, his grin widening as he mouthed, "Told you so." "Yes, this is Marcus," he finally managed to say, still reeling. "Wonderful." Lisa's voice was bright and enthusiastic. "Your story has touched so many people already, and we think our audience would love to hear it from you directly. Would you be available for an interview tomorrow morning? We can arrange everything, including travel." Marcus glanced at Christopher, who nodded eagerly, signaling for him to say yes. Yes, I'd be honored," Marcus said, his voice trembling slightly. "Great. I'll email you the details shortly." "Looking forward to meeting you, Marcus," Lisa said before hanging up. Marcus lowered the phone, staring. Christopher clapped him on the shoulder. "What happened is the world is waking up to see what I already knew. You're a star, Marcus. Now, let's get you ready for tomorrow." Marcus sank into the couch, overwhelmed. "I don't even know what I'm supposed to say on TV. What if I mess it up?" "You won't," Christopher assured him. "Just be yourself. Tell your story. Speak from the heart. People already love you for who you are, Marcus. That's all you need to do." As the day went on, Marcus prepared for what felt like the biggest moment of his life. The emails came pouring in, flight details, a car service, a schedule for the show. His phone buzzed nonstop with messages of encouragement from friends, family, and even strangers. By the time the sun set, Marcus sat by his window, sipping the second cup of coffee Christopher had brought. His thoughts raced as he stared out at the city lights. Could this really be his life now? Could he truly leave behind the struggles and setbacks that had defined his past? But deep down, he knew this was just the beginning. And as the first rays of dawn crept into the sky, Marcus packed his bag and stepped into the unknown, ready to face the cameras, the questions, and the world waiting to hear his story. Little did he know, what awaited him on that national stage would shake him to his core and reveal a twist no one saw coming. The next morning, Marcus stepped off the plane in New York City, his heart pounding with a mix of nerves and excitement. A driver holding a sign with his name greeted him at the gate, ushering him into a sleek black car. The bustling city streets whizzed by as he tried to take it all in: the towering skyscrapers, the energy of the crowds, the overwhelming sense that his life was about to change forever. By the time he arrived at the studio for Good Morning America, Marcus could barely keep his hands from trembling. The producer, Lisa, greeted him with a warm smile and a firm handshake. "Marcus, so glad you could make it. You're going to do great," she said, leading him through a maze of hallways bustling with activity. As he was ushered into the green room, Marcus caught glimpses of the Set A, brightly lit stage with polished hosts, chatting casually as the cameras rolled. His palms were sweaty, and his heart raced. "What am I even doing here?" he thought. Christopher, who had insisted on accompanying him, placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Breathe, Marcus," he said. "You belong here. Just tell your story." A makeup artist and stylist worked quickly to prepare Marcus, and before he knew it, a production assistant was guiding him toward the stage. "You're on in 5, she said with a smile. As he stepped onto the set, the hosts David and Rachel greeted him warmly. "Marcus, it's such an honor to have you here today," Rachel said, motioning for him to take a seat. "Thank you for having me," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. The interview began with a recap of the incident at the restaurant, complete with footage from a patron who had recorded the moment he saved Mrs. Eleanor. The clip played on a screen behind them, and Marcus felt his throat tighten as he relived the chaos of that day. "Marcus, you didn't hesitate to act," David said, leaning forward. "What was going through your mind in that moment?" Marcus took a deep breath. "Honestly, I wasn't thinking about anything except helping her. I saw someone in trouble, and I just did what I thought anyone would do." Rachel smiled. "But not everyone would have done what you did, Marcus. That's why your story has resonated with so many people." As the interview continued, Marcus spoke about his experiences as a waiter, the challenges he had faced in life, and the support he'd received since the story broke. The hosts listened intently, their expressions filled with admiration. Then Rachel leaned in, her tone shifting slightly. "Marcus, there's someone who wanted to be here today to thank you in person. We have a special guest joining us." Marcus froze. "A special guest?" The studio doors opened, and Mrs. Eleanor walked in, her son Christopher by her side. The audience erupted into applause as Marcus stood, stunned. "Mrs. Eleanor," Marcus exclaimed, rushing to greet her. She embraced him tightly, tears streaming down her face. "You saved my life, Marcus," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you." The moment was almost too much for Marcus to handle. The audience wiped away tears, and even the hosts seemed visibly moved. But just as the applause began to die down, Christopher stepped forward with a solemn expression. "Marcus," he said, "there's something you don't know about that day, and I think it's time you heard it." Marcus blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" Christopher hesitated, then turned to the hosts. "Can we take a short break? I'd like to share this privately first." David and Rachel exchanged curious glances but nodded. "We'll be right back after this short break," Rachel announced as the cameras cut to commercial. Christopher pulled Marcus aside, his voice low but urgent. "There's more to this story, Marcus. Something I only found out after looking into the restaurant's history. It's about you and your connection to my mother." Marcus's heart sank. "My connection to her? What are you talking about?" Christopher took a deep breath. "It's complicated, but you're going to want to sit down for this." The revelation that followed would change everything. Marcus thought he knew about his own past. Marcus sat down slowly, his mind racing. "What do you mean, my connection to your mother?" he asked Christopher, his voice barely above a whisper. Christopher exchanged a look with Mrs. Eleanor, who nodded, her eyes glistening with emotion. "Marcus," Christopher began, "when I heard about the incident, I started looking into the restaurant, its owner, and, well, you. I wanted to understand the man who saved my mother's life." Mrs. Eleanor stepped closer, her hands trembling as she placed them on Marcus's. "Marcus," she said softly, "you remind me so much of someone I knew a long time ago, someone very dear to me." Marcus furrowed his brow, feeling more confused by the second. "I don't understand. Who?" Eleanor took a deep breath, her voice cracking with emotion. "Your mother, Marcus." Marcus froze. "My mother?" he repeated, his voice filled with disbelief. Eleanor nodded, her grip on his hands tightening. "Years ago, before you were born, your mother worked for me. She was my assistant, my friend, and like family to me. But we lost touch when I moved across the country." Her voice broke, and she wiped away a tear. "I had no idea she had a son, but the moment I saw you, something felt familiar. And when Christopher started, looking into your background. Everything clicked. Marcus's chest tightened as he tried to process her words. You knew my mom? He whispered, his voice shaking. I didn't just know her, Eleanor said, her eyes welling up with fresh tears. I owe her my life, just as I owe you now. Christopher placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. Your mother saved my mom once, Marcus. It was years ago, during a medical emergency. She acted quickly, just like you did. My mother never forgot her bravery. And now here you are, showing the same courage. Marcus's head was spinning. Memories of his mother, who had passed away years earlier, flashed through his mind. She had never spoken much about her past or the people she had worked with. Now, hearing this, it felt as though a missing piece of his life had suddenly fallen into place. I don't know what to say, Marcus said finally, his voice breaking. This is a lot. Mrs. Eleanor cupped his face gently. You don't have to say anything, Marcus. Just know that your mother would be so proud of the man you've become. I see so much of her in you. The room fell silent as the weight of her words settled over them. Marcus felt a mixture of emotions: grief for the loss of his mother, gratitude for this unexpected connection, and a sense of purpose he had never felt before. The production assistant poked her head into the room. We're back in 2 minutes, she said softly. Christopher glanced at Marcus. Are you okay to go back out there? We don't have to if you're not ready. Marcus took a deep breath, his resolve hardening. No, he said firmly. Let's finish this. People need to hear the whole story. Eleanor smiled through her tears, pride evident in her eyes. You're incredible, Marcus. Just like your mother. As they walked back onto the set, Marcus felt a new sense of clarity. This wasn't just about his story anymore. It was about honoring his mother, his legacy, and proving that courage and kindness could ripple through generations. The cameras rolled, and Marcus sat down, ready to reveal a truth that no one, least of all himself, had seen coming. But as he began to speak, another unexpected figure entered the studio, stopping the show in its tracks. And with their arrival, another layer of Marcus's past was about to unfold. As Marcus began to speak, the studio doors opened again, and everyone turned to see an elderly man walking in slowly, leaning on a cane. His face was lined with age, but his eyes carried a spark of recognition. Excuse me, the man said, his voice trembling slightly. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think I might know this young man as well. Marcus stared at the man, confused. I don't think we've met before, he said cautiously. The man chuckled softly. No, you wouldn't remember me, but I remember you. Your mother once worked for me too. She was the kindest, most selfless person I ever had the pleasure of knowing. Mrs. Eleanor gasped. Harold, is that you? The man nodded. Yes, Eleanor. It's been a long time. I heard about this story on the news and had to come see for myself. Marcus's mother, Sophia, was my housekeeper many years ago. She saved my wife's life during a fire at our home. Without her quick thinking, I wouldn't have had another 20 years with my wife before she passed. The room fell silent, everyone stunned by yet another revelation. Harold stepped closer, looking at Marcus with deep admiration. Your mother was a hero, Marcus, and it seems you followed in her footsteps. Marcus felt his throat tighten, overwhelmed by the layers of history unfolding before him. He had spent much of his life wondering if he was living up to his mother's legacy, and now, hearing these stories, he realized she had been a hero in ways he had never imagined. Taking a deep breath, Marcus turned to the audience, the cameras, and everyone in the room. I didn't know these things about my mom, he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. She never talked about them. But hearing all of this now, it makes me realize how much one person can impact so many lives. He looked at Mrs. Eleanor and Harold, then at Christopher. I didn't save you that day just because it was the right thing to do. I did it because it's what my mom would have done. She taught me that kindness and courage are things you give freely, without expecting anything in return. And now, I see how much that matters. The audience erupted into applause, and even the hosts looked emotional. Mrs. Eleanor took Marcus's hand, smiling through her tears. Your mother would be so proud of you, Marcus. You've shown the world what it means to truly care for others. The rest of the interview was a blur for Marcus, but he felt a weight lift from his shoulders as he shared his story and his mother's legacy with the world. Epilogue. After the interview, Marcus was inundated with offers from speaking engagements to charity partnerships. He decided to dedicate his life to promoting kindness and helping others, founding a nonprofit organization in his mother's name to support first responders and individuals who perform acts of heroism. The restaurant where he was fired eventually shut down due to public backlash, and Mr. Hayes disappeared from the industry altogether. But Marcus didn't dwell on that. He was too focused on making a difference. Christopher and Marcus stayed close friends, and Mrs. Eleanor became a second mother to him, always reminding him of the bond they shared through his mother's bravery. Moral of the story: the story of Marcus teaches us that acts of courage and kindness, no matter how small or large, ripple through time and touch more lives than we can imagine. It reminds us to lead with empathy, stand up for what's right, and honor the legacies of those who inspire us. Sometimes, our greatest impact comes not from seeking recognition but from simply doing the right thing. And in doing so, we create a legacy of love and hope for others to follow.